All right. Thank you, one and all. This morning, as you will see, the Secretary General spoke to the Security Council on the situation in the Korean Peninsula. He told Council members that it is time to reestablish and strengthen communication channels, including the inter-Korean and military-to-military channels, and stressed that this is critical to lower the risk of miscalculations or misunderstanding and reduce tensions in the region. He said that unity of the Security Council is key to achieve denuclearization and to create space for diplomatic initiatives and to do it in a peaceful manner. The Secretary General reiterated the availability of his good offices and the support of the United Nations to facilitate communication among all parties. The Secretary General also highlighted the humanitarian situation in the DPRK and called on members to step up their assistance, noting that only 30% of the funds needed to cover humanitarian needs have been provided. Ismail ul Sheikh Ahmed, the special envoy for Yemen, wrapped up a 3-day visit to United Arab Emirates, where he said he had productive and constructive meetings with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anwar Kirkash, and senior officials to discuss the conflict in Yemen, including the humanitarian situation and the best way to advance a political solution. The special envoy also met with a number of senior leaders of the General People's Congress to offer his sincere condolences on the death of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh and the best way to put an end to the conflict. He added that what is happening in Sana'a is unacceptable and that we need to put an end to the targeting of GPC leaders, activists, and their families. And you will see that yesterday Staffan de Mistura, the special envoy for Syria, spoke to the press in Geneva last night after the completion of the 8th round of the intra-Syrian talks. He told reporters that the real negotiations ultimately did not take place between the parties and called on this last round of talks as a golden opportunity missed. The special envoy said he did not see that the Syrian government was really looking to find a way to have a dialogue and negotiate in this round, and added that he had seen signs that the opposition delegations was trying to negotiate. Mr. de Mistura said that he will be traveling to New York this weekend to brief the Security Council next week. And the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights said today it's deeply shocked and appalled by mass executions on Thursday of 38 men at a prison in southern Iraqi town of Nasiriyah in Iraq, which once again raises huge concerns about the use of the death penalty in that country. And meanwhile, the UN human rights officers visited the area of Tuz in Kurmatu on December 7th and again on December 14th to investigate the reports of burning homes and looting of businesses. They spoke to residents of Tuz Kurmatu in Kirkuk and Erbil who had fled the violence and saw for themselves in Tuz Kurmatu that 150 premises had been burnt or otherwise damaged. The office urges end to all acts that threaten the fundamental rights of the population and calls on Iraqi authorities to ensure that civilians are protected and those responsible for human rights are brought to justice. And our humanitarian colleagues add that on the 13th and 14th of December, some 3,000 people are reported to have fled villages located to the east side of Hanjir Mountain in Tuz Kurmatu district, Saladin al-Governorate, as a result of insecurity and mortar fire in the area. Our colleagues at the Humanitarian Affairs Office tell us that for the 7th day in a row, the daily availability of power supply has dropped to no more than 4 hours in most areas of the Gaza Strip. This shortage is caused by faulty lines and lack of fuel to the Gaza power plant, which critically impacts services in health, water, and sanitation, and exacerbates the suffering of the 2 million people in Gaza. Last week, the UN Humanitarian Coordinator released $2.2 million from the Occupied Palestinian Territory Humanitarian Fund to cover urgent needs in energy backup, medical supplies, and food assistance. No significant changes in the humanitarian situation has been noted since the Palestinian Reconciliation Accord signed in October, which the Secretary General had hoped would lead to alleviating the humanitarian suffering of the people in Gaza. And as South Sudan enters its 5th year of fighting, UNICEF warns that the country is in the throes of a tragedy for children that affects more than half of the child population. The agency's report, Childhood Under Attack, shows that almost 3 million children are severely food insecure. UNICEF warns that new funding is essential to provide critical assistance to children and women In 2018, UNICEF requires $183 million and is currently facing a 77% funding gap in that program. And our colleagues at the UN Refugee Agency said they're increasingly worried about the deterioration of the overall protection environment in which Rohingya refugees are living in Bangladesh. They will start on Sunday to distribute the first of almost 200,000 items of clothing to help recently arrived people prepare for cooler temperatures in the weeks and months ahead. Children, who are 55% of the Rohingya refugee population, are particularly vulnerable. An estimated 10% of all refugees are either disabled or have serious medical conditions or older persons at risks. UNHCR has been working to bolster the quality of shelters in the camps by supplying higher quality material as well as expanding technical support for construction and drainage. At present, a steady but smaller number of refugees continue to cross from Myanmar, some 100 a day, and as you know, an estimated 650,000 Rohingyas has fled Myanmar into Bangladesh since August of this year. A couple of other notes from UNHCR. Last night, they said they evacuated 74 vulnerable refugees, the vast majority of whom are women and children, from Libya to Niger. With the support of UNHCR's partner in Niger, these refugees will be accommodated at guest houses in Niamey. And in Central African Republic, voluntary repatriation of Sudanese refugees from a camp in Bambari has started, with more than 230 refugees have arrived in Sudan since the returns began on Tuesday. 66 UN chartered flights are scheduled to bring some 1,500 refugees home to Sudan by the end of the year. And the Human Rights Office also issued a statement calling for a moratorium on the application of Article 133 of El Salvador's Penal Code regarding prison terms for those who procure or carry out abortions. And after we're done with Brendan, we can expect the U.S. Secretary of State to speak at the Stakeout, probably next 10, 15 minutes or earlier. I would keep an eye on the monitors. And he is then to be followed, as we are told, by the Foreign Minister of Ukraine. And then at 3 p.m. in this room, there'll be a briefing by the Foreign Minister, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, Mr. Taro Kono, who presided over the Security Council meeting this morning. And on Monday, it's International Migrants Day, and I will be joined by Bella Hovey, the Chief of the Migration Service of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs.
Thank you, sir. It's nice when it's crowded to get to the first question. Stefan, 2 questions actually. What would be we've heard the Secretary General, he was clear and very strong speaking in favor of the issue of the Rohingya in Myanmar. What would be his next step or recommendation or so to whom? To Security Council or some other actors?
I think, different parts, the components of the international community have different parts to play. Obviously, it's important for the authorities in Myanmar to grant us access for humanitarian workers and human rights workers in northern Rakhine to see a halt to the military activities. We would also like to ensure that the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, as well as their hosting communities, are fully supported by the international community. And as always, the unity of Security Council is obviously vital.
That's just one short follow-up. Mm-hmm. Does the Secretary General still think that the situation is catastrophic there? His words.
I think for the Secretary General, the situation is not changed. Yes, sir.
Sure. I'm sorry if in your readout I may have missed it, but what's the talks in Geneva on Syria? Mm-hmm. What's the Secretary General's view? Many people describe them as failed, essentially.
Well, I mean, I think the special envoy gave a pretty bleak readout. He represents the Secretary General. Obviously, the Secretary General would have liked to see a better and more positive outcome, as would have Mr. de Mistura and I think all those involved on our side.
Okay. I wanted to. I saw the Secretary General, to his credit, spoke out about the 2 Reuters journalists locked up in Myanmar. One, I wanted to know on that whether he's what he's done beyond the comments in this press conference, what the UN system has done to secure their release. And I also wanted to ask you again about the journalist locked up in Cameroon for 10 days now, Patrice and Ganang, basically had investigated the Anglophone areas and was picked up from the airport in Douala, is in jail, charged with insulting or threatening the president. Has the UN done anything on that?
I don't have an update on the case in Cameroon. It's obvious that we believe that all journalists should be able to practice their trade freely and free from harassment. And on the Reuters issue, I don't have any inputs from UNICEF, and I think the Secretary General spoke out. If I have more to share, I will. Why not?
Thank you. Household question. When the Secretary General is going to hold a full stage seated press conference in this room?
It will be, if off the top of my head, I think the second or third week of January. There's a date set. It'll be on the same day that he speaks to the General Assembly. I don't know if Brendan knows that date where he presents his outlook for the year, and then he will come here and sit down with you and for some time to answer your questions. As soon as we have, I have the date on my desk. I just don't have it in my head.
Will as many journalists as possible be granted the possibility to ask the questions?
In the set time, we will, as always, try to get as many journalists in as possible.
Since Errol's asked, I did want to, you'd said, I think one time, just as you were leaving the podium, that there's been some adjustments. That may have been about opening events on the 38th floor or not, but it seems like you represented Ban Ki-moon as well. It seems like he always did an end-of-the-year one. And I understand, I guess my question is, I've heard it said that Antonio Guterres doesn't want to do one until he has something to announce, but at the same time, like he did Fareed Zakaria, he does different things. So is there some... What's the distinction between?
Listen, I think if I recall correctly, there were some years when Ban Ki-moon did one in January as opposed to December. See, key information is brought to me on a napkin.
Sure.
January 16th is the day of the Secretary General's press conference.
Great.
I think the calendar also had something to do with it, and we want to do a forward-looking press briefing.
Same kind of topic. Will his remarks, I believe he's going to make some remarks this evening, will they be released?
I don't know if will be released. I don't see why they shouldn't be.
Back to Burundi.
Back to Burundi, yes.
Sure,
yes,
because
yes.
In your absence, another series of talks failed, it seems, in Arusha. But there's now a situation in which many people there's a high-profile activist in the country, Nestor Nibitanga, who was picked up from his home November 21st, and he's still in detention. And I'm just wondering, it seems like the UN is not in the driver's seat in terms of stopping a third, fourth, sixth term. But what's the status of the country team there, and are they concerned about this arrest?
We can check with the country team. I haven't gotten an update for you. What I do know is that Mr. Kafando is currently in Bujumbura, and then he'll be traveling to Tanzania in the coming days to discuss the situation with Mr. Mpaka.
And on the China Energy Fund, now that you're back, I just wanted to, we've had some sort of tantalizing, when there's something to say, something will be said. It seems like even some of the countries named in the indictment are starting their own investigations. Is there a process at work, or is it just...
As I said, I will give you my tantalizing answer, which is when I have something to say, I shall say it. Thank you. Mr. Varma, the audience is yours.